Okay, so this conversation is on crafting DEI solutions, and I'm Arun Srikumar. I'm a faculty member here in the marketing area. And we can start with a round of introductions. We have Linika, Kalpana, and Bhushan with us in this panel. So,
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Linika. I lead the Diversity Inclusion Charter at NASSCOM. Been with NASSCOM for the last 8 years. So I'm a 27 plus years women professional without a career break with diverse experience. I've done 20 years of hardcore banking and 8 years of NASSCOM. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kalpana. I'm the founder of Parity Consulting. We are a boutique diversity and inclusion firm. 30 years experience across marketing, sales, leadership development, and 13 years in diversity and equity and inclusion. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation on this.
Bhushan Punani, General Secretary of Blind People's Association, which is just opposite this institute. And to me, coming back to IIM is like homecoming. I just want to share I'm 79 batch, and whenever I'm here, I feel very excited, and more so for this topic, which is very dear to our heart, which we'll discuss. Thank you.
all right, thank you, and welcome to this conversation. Okay, so I would like to leverage this metaphor of crafting. The way an artist crafts work of art from scratch. Let us take the perspective of an organization that is just starting out on DEI strategy formulation and starting with a blank canvas. Okay, and I'd like to pose this question to you, Linika. So a lot of narrative of DEI is steeped in social imperative or the social responsibility of organizations, but for majority of commercial organizations, financial sustainability is a very important concern. So for such organizations, what have you found to be the trigger of starting this process of DEI formulation, and what has really motivated them to start on this journey?
Yeah. So, before I kind of started getting deeper into it, I did not know that this is a more important agenda for smaller medium enterprises than it is for larger organizations. And the smaller medium enterprises are not doing this because their global heads are asking for diversity metrics. They are not doing it because there is a CEO. They are not doing it because it makes sense for their pay compensations, etc. They are doing it because it is making a business sense for them. So I met one of the companies called We Creatic in Pune, and he'd come in for one of our discussions, and he said that he hired somebody who was visually impaired. And this girl has grown the ranks. The person joined as an administration officer and is now leading D&I for them. And he said the kind of loyalty this person brings on the table is just far excellence. And that is what is motivating him to hire more and more. And this is not only for a visually impaired kind of an ability, but it is also for neurodiversity. So there are a lot of these organizations. Like yesterday, I got a message from a BPM company called Fivestein, and they've said we've hired 200 more people into our call centers. See, they are founders. For them, it is making business sense, and that is why they are hiring the diverse workforce. So it's not a social thing anymore. I think people are hiring because it's making a lot of business sense for them. They feel this is the set of employee, the talent resource pool, which is more loyal, has more cognitive ability, has more technological ability, and so on. So there are a lot, like for example, a neurodivergent workforce it's proven that this is the workforce which has cognitive ability, which has very skilled technology skills, right? So they are very good on artificial intelligence, they're very good on data. What they are not very good on is managerial aspect, right? So I was working with a neurodivergent person on a presentation, and the person sent me a message at 7 o'clock in the morning saying, I'm available for the next 2 hours, which is 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. And then I will be available at 8 p.m. So imagine a person sending this message to a manager, what would happen, right? So I think the only thing that they don't understand is the corporate construct, and those are the reasonable accommodations that we as organizations need to start giving. So that's my view.
Thank you. So I'll come to you, Bhushanji, because you have championed the cause of visually impaired individuals. So when you talk to organizations, how have you framed the expected outcomes of DEI to an organization for managers across different levels? So how do you convince them, and how do you get a buy-in from managers to consider including visually impaired people in the workforce?
First of all, we work for all disabilities. Our name is Blind People's Association, but our coverage is all 22 disabilities as recognized by the law. Just to take on from Lenika, actually our approach was different. In our country, apart from the business sense and the personal motivation, we need an instrument which motivates other corporate or other entities. So I'm very happy this topic is being discussed. We have been working from 1995, and with a lot of advocacy, hard work, we could bring a law for this country that every establishment, which is from 2016 now, the new law, that they have to go for diversity inclusion as a mandate. It's no more a matter of option. You have to start as a mandate, but you can grow it as a business sense or your human sense or whatsoever. But the law says that every corporate, public or private, has to have a policy on inclusion of people with disabilities. And it has to be published on the website. And I'm very happy that this is based on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. A group of people across the country, we could really struggle to get a special declaration in the United Nations. And I'm very, very glad that our country was one of the first ones. On the first day, they accepted the declaration, they ratified it, and we amended a new law. We formed a new law called Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, which is what exactly we are talking now. And I'm very happy. I was a part of the law drafting committee, so I have to really fight to bring in a section 21(2) that every corporate in this country needs to have an inclusive policy, and they need to notify. And because of that, there are very classical examples available now. Lemon Tree is the glaring example. If you see the website of Lemon Tree, there are a few hundred people with disabilities. They started not because of law. They started because of the motivation. Now they are doing it as a part of law. KFC, DesignMate, Ford Motors, they are classical examples which are doing. Now this is the only thing is that in our case, we go beyond DEI. We go for the participation of people, the accessibility, gender equality, but all focusing on people with disabilities. Now when we go to a company or a corporate, we tell them, look, there's a mandate. You are bound by the mandate. But this mandate you can accept because it's a human element. It's a part of the human development entity that by taking people with disabilities, you are making your whole company, whole system very diverse. But to do that, there are few mandates, which I think I'll come back in the next question. And basic one is the accessibility. How to make your whole environment, your company, your premises, your showroom, your service center accessible. Again, I repeat, even that is part of the mandate. Making it accessible is not a matter of choice. You have to make your premises, your environment, your technology, your systems, your info system, your communication inclusive, and that's playing a great role in making the corporate, institutes, employers, PSUs, railways, all systems very inclusive, and they started following it. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Kalpana, as Mr. Bhushan also mentioned, that disability is just one small part of DE&I, and DE&I is, each of these three terms can be very broad and very abstract, right? So, for an organization that is starting out on a DEI strategy formulation, how do they prioritize and how do they see which parts of DE&I would align with my own strategy and my own priorities, my strategic priorities? So, what are the key ingredients when one is starting out on DEI strategy formulation?
Right. That's always on the assumption that people begin with a strategy, right? Okay. So I think the most important thing is before you craft your strategy, it's important to look at take a systemic perspective. And the first thing is, of course, the diagnostics. Look at your own, your current state. I think a lot of organizations are not doing that. So they jump into it and say, okay, everybody is doing unconscious, like I got a call from somebody who said, we want a series of unconscious bias workshops. Now, why do you want to do it? Where do you want to focus on? So the diagnostics part, where you begin by looking at assessing your current state, look at your metrics, look at your pain points. For example, in one IT organizations, they found that women returning from maternity, and they studied that metric, and they saw after 1 year, the retention was 0. And then they said, why is this happening really? And when they looked closely, they found that women who were returning were always on the bench. They were being put on the bench. So that is an insight that can feed into your strategy. Or this other organization, she just called me up the other day and she said there were a lot of exits that were happening for women in a particular business unit. And when they went and spoke to the women, all of them did not want to put anything in writing, but they talked about one particular person who was the head. And there was a lot of sexual harassment that was going on. So before you craft your strategy, you need to first look at what is my current state. Where are the women? Where are the blocks? How many women are there? Why are they leaving? Where are they leaving? And then you craft your strategy, right? So the first is, I would say, diagnostic, which you look at your current state. Second is look at your context. Again, that is a very, very important one. Again, there is a lot I see in the industry. And we have partnered with over 200 organizations across different industries at different stages in their journey. And what we find is there is a lot of cut and paste that goes on. So it's working for this organization. Let me pick that up and just try to do this in this organization. But then what is true for an IT industry is very different from what is true for example, a consumer durables company. And I think the morning somebody was talking about it. This was one of our clients, and they said that we want to, bring in more women into our sales roles. Again, where is the systemic perspective? So you bring in women in the sales roles, which means you need to travel, you need to go out. So are there enough hotels that are safe? Number one. Number two, this was about, as I said, consumer durables. So most of the time they were dealing with distributors. So when you talk to distributors, do the distributor places, do they have washrooms? So we actually recommended they did a washroom audit, and that was sent to all the distributors. Or even an automobile organization which came and said that, when I talk to my dealer network and when my male colleague talks to the dealers, obviously they listen to a lot of what the male colleague is saying. So my ability to get work done, to influence them, is not happening. So are you working with those dealers to sensitize them, to prepare them, right? So your context is different. So first understand your pain points. Second, look at your context and your priorities. And then of course the policies and processes, we were talking about it. You have a maternity policy, of course, the government has given it. If you want to extend it further, do you have a policy or the budget for backfilling? The resource is going on leave, and then the resource comes back after maternity and has to face so much of resentment, so much of anger. So the whole thing is about how can we look at it in a very systemic perspective rather than just go ahead and do small interventions. So I think your strategy has to look at it very, very holistically.
So far we've been discussing the early stages of strategy formulation, and we've heard about the positive business outcomes that could motivate an organization to start thinking about DEI. We heard about the policy mandate, and also looking at the internal context and also the market ecosystem before deciding what kind of diversity, equity and inclusion is going to work for me. So before I move on to the next part of the conversation, I'd like to ask if there are any questions. I'll take one or two questions before we move to the next part of the conversation. Are there any questions at this point? Okay. So let me go back to you, Linika. So there's been a lot of research in organizational behavior, in many management disciplines, about how hiring a diverse workforce also leads to, it requires cultural change and also leads to cultural change. There are new work routines that emerge. There are new organizational rituals that emerge. So when an organization is preparing to induct a DEI workforce, uh, what should be the pace of cultural change, and how should they plan for changing the organizational culture, particularly because there could also be conflicts and tensions with the regular workforce who might question the need for such accommodations, right? So how do you do the groundwork for that kind of a cultural change?
So, Arun, I honestly don't believe in saying there is a diverse workforce. See, honestly speaking, today diversity exists everywhere, right? We are all diverse. I don't know if you are 100 people here, everybody is different. And so that is why people have started to talk about diversity of perspectives, right? Even our workspaces are diverse. So there are individuals who are working from office. There are people who are working from home. So diversity exists to that extent. So it is not about normal workforce, usual workforce, diverse workforce, right? So I don't know how many of you in the room agree with me that we are all diverse and there is nothing called diverse workforce. Can we take a poll and then I will answer my question. I need to see how many of you are on my side saying that everybody is different, everybody is diverse. Yeah, so now I can, with a lot of strength, answer. Yeah, so if that is the space that we are in, right, and there is diversity of perspectives, what is very, very important for us as organizations is to always keep thinking about the overarching theme around inclusion and belonging. Right, so today morning only in the conversations we were discussing that how is your diversity, equity and inclusion practices going, and that's what is going to result in the person feeling belonged in the organization. So if I'm starting from a premise that we are all diverse, we all have different perspectives, we all think differently, we are all working from diverse environments. If that is the premise, then for us as organizations, what is very important is to have inclusion and equity in people practices. So as NASSCOM, we worked on a framework where we are saying there are 4 aspects of any DEIB journey. One is diversity, of course. The second is inclusion. The third is equity in people practices. And the fourth is belonging. So any framework, suppose you're looking at gender in any organization, right? You have to look at all the 4 elements from a gender perspective also. Inclusion practices, equity in people practices, belonging practices, which basically then makes this diverse group feel included. You know, to what Bhushanji was saying, that our RPWD Act has this point of saying we should have an equal opportunity policy. All organizations mandated have to have an equal opportunity policy. Now, when this law was crafted, this law says every organization should know about 24 different disabilities. Now, these are not 24 different disabilities anymore. So, these are visible disabilities maybe, but there are also invisible disabilities. So, it is very important for us to have the feeling and understanding of the person's problem, and not because it's a disability problem, it's important for the organization. Like there's this example. There was this person who was working in a BPM company and he had an invisible disability, and the invisible disability was that he could not sit on the chair for more than 2 hours. Now the person would get up and go for a walk. Few days the manager was absolutely okay. After that he started questioning, saying, what is your problem? Why do you get up after every 2 hours? Now the person tried to convince him, I have a problem. But because it was invisible, right, the manager couldn't see the problem, there was no reasonable accommodation that was defined in his policy. But this is a problem. So that is why, while diversity elements, the commercial, the compliance aspects, all of that is very important. But once the whole culture changes, right, we want everybody else to start to feel included and belonged in the organization, we'll start thinking like that. And the reasonable accommodations will keep coming up or keep arriving as we go along and we deal with different diversities. There's a very, another important example that I would want to give. So I've always been a salesperson, very, very aggressive. And as luck would have it, I'm leading the inclusion charter now. So there was this case which was my own self, this thing. I come to office and because my pitch is very high, I started to say, okay, through the day, this is what we will do, right? A, B, C, D. I had no malintentions, I swear by my God. But the person just sitting next to me said, I am getting an anxiety attack. And, you know, I was so scared. I mean, you can imagine, like, as a manager, there's somebody next to you saying, I'm getting an anxiety attack. So at that point in time, I obviously, you know, we all do tick marks like manager, right? Inform the next person and take him to the hospital. All of that we did. But I just did not understand at that point in time as to why is this guy saying he's getting an anxiety attack. And I was like, what rubbish. 21 years of age, these children have nothing to do. We've had so much of hard work. We've done this, we've done that. I just could not understand. But 3 years into DNI journey, and I exactly understand what happened to that guy. The person was from the spectrum. He was neurodivergent. A neurodivergent person doesn't need to be autistic or needs to have a Down syndrome. He basically had a very simple anxiety attack problem, which triggers with a loud voice, with a pitch, with a sound. And that sound triggered that anxiety attack. You know, so these reasonable accommodations need to be understood by us as managers. So I keep repeating for the sake of repeating, DNI is nothing but each manager in the organization needs to be sensitized about different reasonable accommodations for different people. It could be from person with disability, it could be neurodivergent, it could be somebody from the LGBTQI community, it could be a woman, it could be a veteran, and so on. So
Okay.
that's my view.
Thank you. So Bhushanji, building on Lenika's point, now that Lenika has broadened the perspective of diversity for many of us, but there are many. So this idea of diversity may also be unfamiliar to a lot of managers. And when you're dealing with unfamiliarity and you're still trying to create those safe spaces and accommodations, managers may either tend to overdo to make sure that everything is right and everything is there is a sense of belonging that is cultivated, or even do too little, right, and figure out as we go. So in your engagement with organizations, how have you prepared them? For example, if it's an organization that has never hired visually impaired people, if they were to ask you, how do we create this kind of a safe space and what kind of accommodations are required, how do you work with them to figure out the right amount or the right kind of accommodations?
Thank you for this question. But I'd like to congratulate Lenika. You have been using the right term, reasonable accommodation. I'm sure very few of you have heard of this term. This is an American term, which was
The DNI professionals like you, sir.
okay, which was adopted in our law after a lot of negotiation, because it's a very broad term. It means that you have to modify your environment, you have to adapt, you have to adjust, so that everybody has equal access to everything. So you have to, modification or giving wheelchair or giving technology or giving access to anything is not a charity, not a favoritism. It's the basic requirement. Unless you do that, DI cannot happen. Thank you very much for that. Now coming back to your question, in fact, I'd like to share an example. One of the largest corporate of this country, we wanted to break the ice. Why not the biggest corporate of our country should also go for DEI, employing people with disabilities? The first step was, which is very interesting, to approach the top, the highest authority or the person of that company, and motivate him that this is what is required, this is what is a business sense, that if you are so open to a lot of things, why not to this component? And the starting point was, which I request all of you to do wherever you are, invited the complete HR team of that company, including the corporate head or the global head who looks after all the companies of that corporate, and brought them to BPA for half a day. Some of you have been to Vision Dark today. We took all of them to Vision the Dark, showed them technology, showed them, did the simulation, what the meaning of a disability, what it happens if your one hand is not working, both eyes are not functional, and did the simulation. and you'll be surprised, many of them just cried. They could not realize that disability could be so simple to handle if you understand it very well. That was stage one. Stage two, we invited the HR heads of respective companies and brought them again and motivated them, spent almost a few hours with them. And then we offered, which we do for every company, we have done for many companies, we follow a procedure. First of all, we'll do the access audit of your premises, your works, your office, or central office. We'll see how it could be made more accessible, because we can't keep on blaming that your building is not accessible, your toilets are not accessible. We have to go and tell them how this could be made accessible, by which method and what the procedure. So we have a team which does access audit, and then we tell them whichever persons you employ, we shall take care of their skill development. The basic training we shall impart at our cost. And that is, now just to share with you, in diversity, everybody cannot be fitted into every hole. You need different jobs, different profiles, different work for different disabilities. For example, person with hearing loss is excellent for machine work if he is able to, because he has no problem with the noise level and other distortion. People with visual impairment are very good with IT, with computers and technology. So depending on the type of disability, you have to zero in such a way that we are not looking at the disability, we are looking at the ability, and we are compensating the disability by technology, by systems, by equipment, by devices, by right environment, by right attitude, right understanding. If you do that, a lot of people, almost everybody can be fitted into different type of job. These industries don't work on a long production cycle. They break everything into tasks, and everyone performs a task, and you can fit into the people with different disability into different tasks if you do the matching between the requirement of the task and the type of disability. Then we suggest the technology, we suggest the system, we give the communication support. If they're working with hearing impaired, we provide the sign language interpreter, or we train their staff how to interpret the sign language or the total communication. Then we do the hand holding, that if you take people with such disabilities, we shall take care for a few months, we'll come and guide them. You'll be surprised, and I'm very glad when I report before you that corporate first decided to hire 10,000 people with disability at different location, and to make the starting a beginning point, the beautiful thing they did was, I'm very glad they hired the person with a lady with visual impairment as the HR head diversity. So the HR head of diversity of that company is a lady with visual impairment but having HR qualification. She has done her postgrad in human resource development. She was working with another corporate. She lost the vision. Now she heads that. And now the result is, when I talk before you, they are going to hire 100,000 people with disabilities in the different units across the country and across the globe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Kalpana, so since both Linika and Bhushanji spoke about sensitizing employees, and the idea of immersion, taking the perspective of a diverse or a differently abled employee to understand what they go through. But the most common practice across organizations is also some kind of diversity training that is given to, or a DE&I training that is given to, and the outcomes or the effectiveness of these trainings have been that there's conflicting evidence of how effective these are. So I wanted to hear your take on diversity trainings, and there's also some very interesting findings in research which has said that sometimes diversity trainings may also lead to what is known as subtle ableism. That is, you start looking at the work of an individual from the lens of compassion rather than performance, right? And that then over time, in the long term, it hinders or hampers their growth prospects, right? So I want to hear from you about how has your experience with diversity trainings been, and are there different ways of sensitizing managers and other workforce about DE&I?
So a lot of the trainings that we do is for gender inclusion specifically, so women. And somehow the conversations about men and women tend to be extraordinarily passionate, to use a mild word. But yes, we do see a lot of resistance, a lot of, in fact, even hostility. And a lot depends on how much space you provide for them to surface that hostility without being confrontational, right? So the question on how effective are the diversity trainings, sensitizing managers on the need for why do we need to really bring women, if it is located once again in their context. So wherever I've seen this work very well, because the moment you go and tell managers, we need to hire more women, you know, there are a lot of biases. They say, what biases? My team is the best. I don't have, there are no biases, right? So what we always recommend, that's why I always insist, do some diagnostic, right? And when we do that and we take that and show it to them, hey, listen, this is what we are hearing from the women in your organization, in your team. These are the experiences. For example, somebody said that, you know, my client is more understanding of my, you know, my differential needs than my managers are. Or even that my manager is asking me, you know, why do you have to take this call? Why can't you take this call at this time? So we actually tell them that this is what is happening in your context. When you show that mirror to them, it is definitely much more effective. So that's one thing. Second thing is we find that these diversity trainings work very well. Once again, if we talk about their context, let them talk. For example, managers come back and say that, okay, you asked me to, you're now telling me that I should hire more women in my team. So that means I have to wait for a particular role to be filled. How long can I wait? I don't know how long I can wait because I have business deliverables. So when you get them to talk about what are their challenges, rather than going there and sensitizing them and saying, hey, you need to hire, we tell them this is what needs to happen. What are your challenges? How can we help you do that? Then it is not a training, right? It's a dialogue, it's a conversation. Then you've got their buy-in. The third thing I find is every time, if there is, once again, going back to the leadership commitment, I think somebody was talking about that. If your CEO is committed and they walk the talk, definitely these things are received far, far better. Have I seen cases where, you know, it has been counterproductive? Maybe sometimes where they go back and then they, you know, there is a lot of, are you saying I'm biased? Are you saying that I'm not, you know, hiring women? There tends to be a lot of angst. But if, again, it is looked at from a systemic perspective, they land well. But if you just go and drop unconscious bias training just like that, I think it can be very counterproductive.
Thank you. Since you also spoke about diagnostics and looking at the outcomes of the trainings, an obvious way to measure the outcomes of any kind of a DE&I strategy or program is to simply look at the proportion of diverse individuals in the workforce. But I'm sure there are more subjective indicators or more subjective outcomes that also need to be tracked, right? So this is an open question, right? What is the best way to see how well we are doing on DE&I? Or for any organization? How should the outcomes be tracked and measured or evaluated?
See, what we've tried to do as an industry association is we've kind of built a framework. First thing first, right? What is that framework under which the organizations should start to measure their D&I metrics? So as I said, it's diversity, inclusion, equity in people practices, and belonging in all diversity aspects. So see, one, it's a fact. What gets measured gets done. I think we were speaking in the morning as well that it's not about diversity metrics all alone, right? It is about that index. So how we've calculated that index. So for example, on a diversity of gender, for example, we have questions which cover all aspects of gender: diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And then as an organization, you say, do you do this? Do you do this? And there is a scoring to each question. And with that scoring comes an organizational index to say on a scale of 1 to 10, this is your score. And that's how we've calculated the industry index on different aspects. So gender, what's the index? PWD, what is the index? LGBTQIA plus, what is the index? So that on all diversity pillars, as an industry, we have an element. See, it is very, very important. Like, for example, when she was saying, we've all been saying, right, that inclusion is a CEO agenda. Bhushanji also said that. If we are, that's the most important stakeholder, right? But when we measure and we get the results, so for example, the study that we did, we realized that wherever CEO is holding the D&I agenda, the women representation in that organization is 40% plus. So that is why it is important, and you all could refer to this report. So this is the D&I landscape in India report that we've done. It talks a lot about numbers. It basically says, like for example, we've all been saying that organizations do D&I more for a consumer strategy, for customers, right? So this study revealed that organizations today are not doing D&I for consumers. It is happening for their own employees, So that's the kind of, to say what is the percentage of organizations where inclusion is not a HR agenda or an L&D agenda, but it is a CEO agenda. So it's, I think, 48% plus. So, these metrics are very, very important for any industry to kind of come up with. Like today only, Niharika ma'am was saying that organizations do not open up with data. So that's when we get the pain points. And when we did this study, we realized that only 38% organizations declare their results publicly from a D&I perspective. And that's a huge bottleneck, right? Until and unless we get the percentages, until and unless we get where do we stand, how do we correct that? So this is the first time ever, like for example, in the tech sector, we know it's 36% women in the workforce, right? But this is the first time when we attempted to know what's our percentage on PWD and LGBTQI. Even if we know it's less than 2%, even if we know it's 1.48%, LGBTQI obviously has to be more because you don't know what's open up framework, etc., how many have opened up. But still, this is a good base to have, right? We know 8% of the organizations have started to talk on neurodiversity. Now, today we know the base, right? We know where do we stand, and then we take it from here. But until and unless we know what the D&I landscape in India looks like, right? How do we kind of correct? So this is a very good study. I mean, somebody was saying in India, what is the study? I think this is a study. And also the framework that we are talking about, we're trying to put this framework on a tool, on a technology tool, so that organizations could keep taking the framework and could keep measuring their index and could keep saying on a scale of 1 to 10, if I'm at 4, I need to move from 4 to 6, 6 to 8. And it could be anonymous and it could be locational. So for example, if an organization like Cognizant has 5 offices, right? So they could say, okay, we'll take Delhi this index, Bangalore this, Coimbatore this, like that. So that's the attempt.
I'm just curious, based on this data that you have collected, what is the characteristics of organizations that usually tend to be pioneers or very early, fast movers on DE&I, and which ones are the slowest or the most resistant to change? Any common characteristics that separate the two?
I personally don't think there are organizations
Can you use a mic, because we have mic.
Sorry. So I don't think there are any organizations which have resistance to change. So we have Vishakha sitting here from Sapien, and I want your attention, ma'am. So this is one organization where it's very beautifully said that, we have these gender neutral washrooms, right? And people say, infrastructure create karo, gender neutral washrooms. This is one organization which says the leaders need to use the gender neutral washrooms first. You're creating that bias, no? Saying, this is so this is an interview, the person from the LGBTQI community went for an interview. And the organization said, hey, we have A, B, C, D, E, F. The person said, sorry, I'm not interested. You've excluded me before I have even joined. You're saying, हम LGBTQI plus community के लिए 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 चीज़ें करते हैं. उसने बोला, इसका मतलब तो मैं बिल्कुल ही अलग हूँ आप लोगों से. You know, but that's not the way this community wants to feel, right? They want to feel included. Or hum log, like I went for a meeting in one of the organization and the guard says, no, madam, आपका washroom इधर है. I said, आपको कैसे पता? So, you know, while we are saying we are DNI, we have gender neutral washrooms, but it's not still in us, right? It's not ingrained in us. And our view, like I was presenting to somebody from US, and sorry if I sound too passionate, but I do get too passionate. I get carried away with the topic. And I was presenting to somebody from US and the person says, oh, India has a transgender act. I did not know. So the same day I said, okay, as NASSCOM, we'll create a booklet of compliance considerations of DNI. So I don't know, how many of you know how many acts do we have as a country? Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have a lot of DNI professionals sitting here. Let's take a poll. How many of you say we have one compliance, laws as in laws? Like the sir said, RPWD Act is a law, right? So we take a poll. Do we have one act? How many for one? Nobody. 2. Nobody. 3. No one. 4. Hey guys, are you going to answer me or not? 3. 3. 4. How many for 5? Huh? How many for 5? DNI professionals, how many compliance aspects do we have? Huh? How many? 2, 3, 4, 5 nahi, Shakha. 2, 3, 4, 5. No, it is to this number only. जहाँ तक मैंने पोल लिया है वहीं तक है. तो 5 हैं. हाँ, so I will tell you, Maternity Act, POSH, Maternity Act, POSH Act, RPWD Act, Transgender Act, HIV Act. All included. Safety compliance, equal opportunity, everything is in these 5 acts. As per the government, I don't know, maybe if there is any, but we've done a compliance booklet. There is a... maybe then. But for our sector, these are the 5 acts, which is more POSH, maternity, transgender, RPWD, and HIV Act. So when I was presenting to this fellow, he said, oh, India has a transgender act. I said, yes, India has a transgender act.
Okay, so thank you. Would the others also want to talk about the idea of measuring outcomes? Bhushanji and...
Of course, when you're talking about representation, it's the numbers that you look at, and you look at the movement in needle movement in how many have been hired, how many have been promoted, etc. in representation. We also measure inclusion the same way that she said. We have 5 parameters that we look at and measure the inclusiveness of the organization. That's also possible to measure. Yeah, basically those are the 2 ways in which we measure. But I think there is need, and that's one of the things that I was talking to Claude about, that we definitely need a lot more robust scales and measurements that we need to do.
Actually, our approach is very different because the group we are working is very isolated, very marginalized. You're talking only about the visually impaired and hearing impaired. There are people with mental illness, there are people with autism, there are people with multiple disabilities, people with deaf blindness, people who are completely confined to the 4 walls. They are chained, they are put behind the walls for years together. They are stoned, they are not allowed to come out, they are not considered human being, they are worse than the animals in the house. So in our case, we have to set different parameters. Figures will not work. We have to demonstrate that these people can do everything if given the opportunity. I give a classical example. Very this institute, we have to break our head to motivate, tell them there's a law. You have to admit people with disabilities. First time we succeeded was, Niharika madam, pardon me, 2008. Amit Jain was the first visually impaired person to get into this institute, and today more than 500 people with disabilities have been trained at this very institute. The Gaganbir Singh was the first visually impaired person to be admitted in IIM Bangalore, and both of them have done their postdoctorate. One of them in the Norway, another in the Switzerland. So they're really, gone out of the roof, and they after IIM Ahmedabad and Bangalore, they went to Switzerland, they went to Norway, they are teaching in America. So the first lady in the world, in India, who got the silver medal in the para table tennis is from our institute. Bhavina, who is now having 7 crore worth of cash award. So we have to demonstrate that she's in the wheelchair, but she can be world player. The first masseur, a deaf-blind masseur, you can come and meet him, Jay, is from our institute. First deaf-blind girl, Google it if you have the mobile with you and see deaf-blind physiotherapy. The only deaf-blind physiotherapist in the world is from our institute. So when anybody comes, you tell them, look, there are sports people, there are people who are physiotherapists. The first person who got admission in the BJ Medical College, a low vision person, we fought up to the Supreme Court level. We had to go to Supreme Court to get the order that he is a human being, he is entitled. This year he completed his MBBS, he is going to do his MS as well. So once we demonstrate this to the corporate and to the world, that we have 7,000, I repeat, 7,000 people who are mentally ill, who have recovered. Now they're working, they're making a lot of products which are selling. If you go to any Farsan shop in Ahmedabad, most of shops use our padiyas, the paper trays which we make at our centers. So once you do that, and you have a demonstration to give that these people, given the opportunity, given the technology, given the admission, given the support, given the hand holding, they could be like anybody else. Unless we do that, nothing will change. But once we do that and we demonstrate to them, you'll be surprised that today every postgraduate institute in this country run by the government has to have 5% people with disabilities. And that's making a big stride. And those are now managers. I told you that the HR manager of diversity division is a girl with visual impairment. Once we have people sitting in the helm of the affairs and they themselves have gone through that struggle, they'll be more considerate. So what we are trying to do is, as an institute, we are creating the role models. You can see our website, beepindia.org. You'll see n number of people. A girl, she cannot even stand. She's lying down in the bed. And can you imagine a girl lying downward, upward, down, is doing the Silai Kaam, is running the sewing machine. You can see the story. And then you see that what type of struggle is involved in their life. But by giving the lecture, by just telling the people, showing the law, nothing will change. It will change the psyche, the attitude, understanding, outlook, thoughts of people. If you demonstrate to them, look, it is possible by the use of technology, and that's what we are doing. And our biggest achievement is that we work for all disabilities, and we have n number of role models across the country, across the globe. Our people have gone and worked as physiotherapists in USA, in Germany, in many other countries. We have people who are doing computer programming. TCS has more than 100 people with visual impairment who are now the programmers. Wipro, Mindtree, they all have people who are people with different disabilities and have hit the high position, even the head of the department and all. Once we do that, then only DI will be happening for our people. Thank you.
Thank you.
The TCS Chief Technology Officer is visually blind.
Yeah.
So what we've also started to do as NASSCOM in all our events, we have this concept of inclusion stories, sir. So we get people from the diverse aspect who are already working in organizations to come and share their stories. So we call these inclusion stories. So what we are basically saying is we need to get them to mainstream. Just doing one event for them separately, saying this is our DNI event, we are excluding them. So what we've started to do is, one, we've started to integrate this conversation into everything that we do at NASSCOM. And more importantly, get these inclusion stories on the stage. Like get somebody who's visually impaired, Paralympic players, children, neurodiverse. So talk about their stories so that there is more for the audience to learn from.
Thank you. We'll request participants to ask questions, please. Yes. Can we get the mic to this gentleman?
Yes. Am I audible? So I have a question with Bhushan sir. Sir, you talked about the accessibility within the building premises for the people with visual impairment. But if you see, whenever people with visual impairments go to their office premises or their employment locations, during the travel, be it commute related travel or business travel, they found a lot of travel related challenges. So whatever accessible to us, their perceived accessibility may vary very significantly. For example, when I talk with some of the people with visual impairment, they talk about what difficulty they face while picking the buses in the metro or on the trains or local trains. So what I was thinking, since whenever some office premises locate, it generates a lot of mobility because people come there for their job. Although solving the travel related problems are generally thought of a role of transport officers who manage the public buses and trains, but since employers also play a lot of role in generating the mobility, and since people with visual impairments are also part of that mobility, so don't you think that there should be some strategies from the employer side that they provide support for their travel related challenges in terms of business travel and in terms of commuting?
Okay.
Maybe for providing incentive to live closer to their office premises, or providing transport related services to their disabled populations, or carpooling facilities, this
Right.
kind of stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. In fact, to sort out that issue, as I mentioned, we have brought in a law that every public building, where public goes is public building, that's very simple definition, has to be accessible. Every transport has to be accessible. Every communication website has to be accessible. It sounds very difficult, but good beginning has been made. Anybody travels by BRTS Ahmedabad? This is the first road public transport in the country which is accessible. Every bus stand costs them 10 lakhs extra to make it ramp, tiles, signs. That is definitely not 100%, but there is almost 70-80% accessible. They have to spend 250 crore extra to make the BRTS Ahmedabad accessible. Now it's become a fashion. Metro across the country. In fact, every metro, once the project is complete, is accessible to all disabilities. They have the lift, they have the signage, they have the special floors, they have the special window. And BRTS is free for all the people with disabilities, especially the visual impairment. Same Kankriya Lake, which is a big tourist space in Ahmedabad, they made it accessible. You're very right, we have a long way to go. But all airports, now stations, every new station in this country will be accessible. Can you believe Ahmedabad station, which was inaccessible, today is accessible? We are one of the first station in Gujarat which has lift to every platform. We are using the baggage lift earlier. Now there's a dedicated lift from go to one platform to other platform. It has been done. See, it's a struggle. It's a consistent struggle, which we have to keep on doing. But only good part is, as we have a law, as we have the guidelines, and I'm very happy to inform you, our law is monitored by the PM office. They are very keen that this country accepts that. And second thing, we are a very strong group of advocacy people. We are the advocates which keep on bringing a lot of orders from the Supreme Court, High Court, etc. Beginning has been made, but you are very right. We have a long way to go. If you go to America, many cities, almost everything is accessible because they started much earlier. We are lagging behind by 50 years. Even in China, most of the major cities are accessible. But we are also very proud. Out of the developing countries, we are most accessible. That's only some satisfaction. Our law is perfect. If you anytime you Google it, ROPWD, and read that law, it's one of the most well drafted laws any country has. But I agree, unless we do a lot of public awareness, lot of motivation, lot of support, it will be very difficult to achieve the target in a few years.
My question was, these are the initiatives that generally government offices.
Can you take the mic?
My question was related.
No, can you just wait for the mic?
So, sir, although we know a lot of these accessibility related issues in the travel and transport sector are taken by the public offices like the government departments, my focus on the employer related
Got it.
strategies.
Okay, so should the employers be doing something to?
Yeah,
facilitate
definitely they
transport?
have to do that. In fact, that's what, I mean, I started with that every person, every company has to have a policy, has to have an accessible environment. Only thing is that we are given a time of 5 years for the existing building to be accessible. It has not happened to that extent. But all the new buildings which are coming up, even in the corporate world, they are definitely becoming accessible. If you go to the new factory of Ford Motors, which we done the access audit, it's very accessible. They modified it a few places. All the new buildings are accepting the law. Now, as per the guidelines, there cannot be a new building which does not follow the accessibility standards. They will not get the BU unless they do that. But point still stands, the new buildings are only a few. There are many old buildings which need retrofitting, which need that. But if you keep on persisting and keep on motivating, I'm sure they will also come around.
I don't think I have an answer 100%, but I'll still tell you what organizations are attempting to do. I do face a setback to say you can keep sitting in a room and talking about policies, measuring, acts, but do you know what a visually impaired person goes through, for 20 years of his life, right? Just staying closed door because our whole country's infrastructure is not accessible. But yeah, that's a fact. So as organizations do have a transport facility given. They do have a buddy system. And for the tech sector, people with diverse needs, it could be visually impaired, it could be somebody who's neurodivergent, can work from home. So this whole COVID thing, right, has also told organizations that they can improve their diversity ratios because of coming to office is not mandatory. See, there are a lot of other challenges also. For example, if there is a building and you have like one office on ground floor, like company A on ground floor, company B on first floor, company C on the third floor, and if company C is employing somebody who is visually impaired and there's contingency, right? There's a fire or whatever. What happens? It needs a BCP planning, right? How does that person exit from the third floor? So organizations are even thinking about that and saying that then it needs a buddy who needs to be available with this person immediately when there's a contingency situation so that the person could quickly come down. And that is why for some of these reasons, the organizations are saying that you can work from home. So those options or those are the options that are available. Because these are infrastructural issues in our country, and to support that, these are the answers.
So what I also hear is that, in this entire conversation, there are three sources of solutions. One is, of course, what the policy mandates. Then there is the best practices within the industry, right? Solutions that can be borrowed from other success stories. Yeah, it's working. And the third is also bottom-up insights that you ask, the workforce, your employees, about what is required in terms of accommodation, right? Now, is there some kind of a set template or some kind of a process that an organization should ideally follow on where what is the canvas from where these solutions should emerge? Should it start bottom-up? Should it start with the mandate? Should it start by looking at what the peers are doing? What is usually the most successful, and where have you seen failures in implementing solutions related to DEI?
Where have organizations failed?
Yes.
First
So,
and foremost,
just to make the question a little clearer, see, with solutions coming from multiple directions, the organization can't know ab initio which one is the best solution, which one is likely to fail, right? So have you seen any examples of solutions that have not emerged from the workforce, just borrowed from other settings or borrowed from what the policy mandates, that have simply not worked out?
I've seen organizations which have started and begin working on diversity. I think that's a big no-no, where I've seen they bring in diversity, and especially women diversity, where women have left, they hired women and then they leave because they've not set the context. So where there is a focus on diversity rather than on inclusion, first creating the inclusion. That's why I think most of us DI practitioners talk about, we don't talk about D and I, we talk about I and T. So inclusion, when they focus on inclusion rather than on diversity, you're automatically able to attract that. The second thing I'm seeing is where organizations are struggling is there is a lot of buy-in for equality, but I don't see them so much buy-in for equity. So everybody says, yeah, I'm committed to equality. But when we start talking about equitable policies, there is a lot of resistance there. Third thing where I see that there is a lot of struggle where they are failing is when the middle managers are not bought in. That seems to be a very big challenge, and that seems a challenge because we're not able to give them a business case. Why is it that we need to do this? So when we are able to set these three right, I think we are able to
Okay.
get the I&D agenda going.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Rishi.
So I can just go ahead like this, like. So I have two questions, and
Because we're short of time, can you just ask one? Your important primary question? Okay.
Link the two. Link the two. Marry the two.
yes. So as we were talking about transgenders, this is a very debatable topic because people don't understand what transgender is. Like when I say transgender, there are the UNOC community who are considered transgender by many people, but there are also transgenders who have not gone body reformation. So now in such a situation, like as you are dealing with it every day, if something goes wrong, we see that there is a harsh pushback against the community. And with toilets and private spaces as such, how do we deal with that kind of how do we standardize that? Something that is not even standardized in literature yet. That is question number one. Question number two is, as Kalpana ma'am said, like about women going to distributors and distributors not listening to them as one of the problems. Now, in such a situation, what do we do? As Bhushan sir also said, like with disabled, we need to put them in spaces where they can work their best. Like deaf people can work with electronics. Do we do that method and change the departments of the women? Or do we go to the distributor and reform the entire system? As an organization, what do we do? So these are my two questions.
Would you like to take the first question?
The second one I can take.
Okay, please.
Absolutely the system. You have to set the system right.
Okay. Yes.
Hi. Is it? Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Just like a quick observation, sort of a question, sort of a thing, that we've talked a lot about diversity and the other parts, equity and inclusion for gender, sexuality, disabilities and all of that. But another thing that's very key, at least to India specifically and now global, is caste. Like, I'm sorry, I missed a lot of part of the first. I don't know if this conversation already happened. But I mean, why is caste so absent in our conversations? Especially since it's so emblematic to India specifically. We're all in India, right? So right now, so.
Caste. So why is caste absent in the conversation of DE&I?
See, when I don't think I have an answer, but I'd still attempt to answer. So when I started my conversation and I said diversity exists in too many forms, right? So overarching inclusion and belonging is very important. While we did get a little deeper into PWDs and LGBT and gender, but we didn't get deeper into caste. But I'll tell you, it is not caste. It's even tier 2 cities, so like a North India person, right? So when this whole COVID hit and there were managers sitting out of North, and people of tier 2 reporting into these managers, and I was the first one to say the workforce is going to leave because there is so much of cultural difference. You know, like when I went to Pune for the first time and I was entering an office, and the guard and the reception and, you know, the lady took her own time to get me entry into the office. Now, nothing right, nothing wrong, but, you know, as a North Indian, I was like, hey, what's your problem? My time, meeting time, but I just couldn't utter a word. You know, so, you know, those are the themes of around inclusion and belonging, right? If somebody is doing their job and they are taking a particular time, then I need to be understanding of what's happening around me, who's doing it, and so on and so forth, right? I can't be forcing my culture on them. And this is the same theme that applies to caste, people from tier 2, tier 3 cities. The moment you start to understand the differences and start to apply your inclusion and belonging practices, then all the diversity perspectives can be managed. You know, so that's the broader theme that as organizations are today focusing on. See, because a lot of people in, for example, in the tech sector are working from home. A lot of people in the tech sector are working from tier 2, tier 3 cities. Organizations are opening offices near to workforce where they've gone to their hometowns, etc., right? So diversity today has gone beyond generational, for example. That's a very, very important diversity that's talked about, because in organizations today there are 5 generations working, from Gen Zs to baby boomers, right? So if that's the kind of differences, and there is huge differences in generations, there would not be differences in gender or PWD or from the community as differences would exist in the generational diversity. So people have now started to talk about reverse mentoring. People have now started to say we should have people from Gen Zs into our councils. You know, there's an organization which said the CEO's position is going to be run by this generation for some 1 week or something, so that, you know, the actual action strategies can come out. So, you know, as, you know, Kalpana mentioned, it's very important. What organizations are today doing is they're first measuring where is the diversity that exists. So there's something called diversity dashboard that people are preparing, right? So for example, I prepared a dashboard for our organization to say, what's the kind of experience we have, right? For how many years have people stayed with our current organization? Because that's huge diversity. Somebody stayed for 20 years and somebody stayed for 2 years. What's that percentage? If we have a lot of people who've stayed in our organization for more than 20 years, then we are not listening to people who are less than 2 years. Because the diversity is completely skewed towards people staying in our organization for more than 20 years. And they are calling the shots. So somebody who's just for 2 years is not heard. So today it is very, very important of what diversity perspectives exist. It could be caste, it could be tier 2 and so on. And then the measures are taken by organizations. Long answer, but...
Yeah, if your question was, are organizations working towards, you know, castes that are disadvantaged and marginalized, there are some organizations who are doing work in economically disadvantaged and indirectly working towards, because there is an alignment right there.
Okay.
Some organizations.
Actually,
Yeah, we heard. Yeah.
Actually, I'll answer that in a very different way. There was a debate going on in the High Court of Gujarat. Justice Mohit Shah and Justice Dharmadhikari, they were debating the same issue. Caste is a birth phenomena, is a social stigma, but these diversified groups are cross-cutting. Even when they talk of disability, talk of gender, talk of senior citizen, talk of orphans, talk of delinquent, they all are cross-cutting. These are irrespective of the caste. Within every caste, these groups will be there. So they were debating that we have reservation up to 48%. But when we had reservation of 3%, it does not add. Because we are not talking of anything additional. This is within every group of reservation, SC, ST, OBC, people with disabilities, people with gender discrimination, people who are orphan, who are delinquent, they are cross-cutting into all the groups. So one cannot ignore the caste, but when we talk of diversified group, from each caste, from each social group, people who have very, very different needs, who are ignored, who are marginalized, who are isolated, who are not in the mainstream because of there's some limitation of their movement, mobility, their birth, their economic status. So caste is not being ignored, but we are going beyond. We are talking about the cross-cutting issues which concern each and every caste, each and every economic strata. All these groups are there everywhere. That's what we are trying to focus. When I talk about disability, I don't think of caste at all. Everybody from every caste having disability is a welcome step, because we have work for everybody irrespective of their caste, because our concern is not what he or she is from birth. Our concern is what is lacking, how that can be compensated, how reasonable accommodation could be provided to bring them to a certain level irrespective of caste.
And
Thank
that
you.
is why caste is not talked about.
Okay. So, we would like to keep this conversation going, but we're already 20 minutes over time.
That's a missing link I found in everybody.
Sure, sure.
Just a short
Yes.
stuff as tablet. Thanks. I'm Amrita Ganguly. I'm with Tata Motors currently, but I would like to talk on behalf of Tata Group. And I think the question he raised is a very fair point and a pertinent point, because I've also worked in the social sector. In our conversations, we have not consciously created a differentiation between urban scenarios and rural scenarios, where the equity factor caused out of the caste-based discrimination, which historically puts certain sects of community at a disadvantage, needs equity interventions more than inclusion interventions as step one. So what the social sector historically has done, that's where CSR is more engaged with your caste-related or already sectoral disadvantaged communities. And DI narrative, if I may say so, historically is already a part of affirmative action that has had a long-standing relationship in the corporate universe. So DEI is an offshoot of affirmative action and not the other way around, that why is caste not sitting in DEI? So, and I think for all of us, especially sir in PWD, I represent a small observation where your work has been fantastic, because you have kind of taken an all-canvassing approach to solutioning what you do. But historically, we have seen a lot of PWD work only happening with someone who is qualified from the urban sector, and people don't want to touch the rural sector because that requires equity. जहाँ आपको कुछ करना है उनको एक लेवल तक लाने के लिए, उसके बाद ही वो फंक्शनल हो सकते एक कॉर्पोरेट सेटअप में. Nobody wants to touch it because it's not fashionable enough. So कहीं पे I think all of our discussion, if I may, with your permission, I just want to underline, let's not forget the urban-rural reality of DEI and affirmative action in all our conversations, because corporates do have a responsibility on both segments. So that's my two bits.
Thank you for making that point. So I know that we are ending abruptly and we have not reached anything that is conclusive or final, but that perhaps is also a good thing, because we are trying to see or look at this conversation as the starting point or a beginning of many more conversations of this nature on this important topic. So thank you very much for participating in this panel discussion. Thank you for your rich and practical insights, and hope you have a great rest of the evening. Thank you.